Hello again, class. It is week 6. This is Troy Bayne. So glad to think through this chapter 39, on the destiny of a nation, a Christian America. And this has been one of those weeks in ministry. I serve at a local church, and so some weeks seem messier than others, and this has been one of those messy weeks. I have the opportunity to officiate a wedding on Saturday. Interesting story there. Preach a funeral on Sunday afternoon. Got to celebrate the birth of a baby yesterday. And in the middle of all that, there's 3 couples that I'm getting to sit with, and 2 of the 3 at least are probably headed toward divorce. It's just been a messy week, and that is really pretty much a snapshot of life as the church. And certainly the Christian America idea that we read about in chapter 39 reflects that, because it seemed kind of messy as the church went west. And then in the mid-1700s, how it started going west into the western frontier of the United States, and what that looked like. And so as I was reading through this chapter, I couldn't help but think of the current week that I'm in right now, as it is so easy to get off track and have this idealistic dream of a nation that is Christian, as opposed to being Christians in the middle of a nation. And so keeping our eyes fixed on Christ and in the eternal kingdom that we're a part of, living here as Peter says, exiles or sojourners here. And so just reflecting on that as I go through this chapter was very helpful. One thing I didn't know was when the United States was born in the late 1700s, that only 5 or 10% of Americans were actually church members. And so there was a huge push, a revivalistic kind of a push by preachers heading west to convert and bring people into the church. And so that was a shocking stat to me. The Bill of Rights built in this idea of not a government-run church, so the opening of denominations was certainly welcomed, and that happened as the church grew and spread. It says that denominations were free to define their own faith and practices, and so that was also facilitated, as stated in the chapter, through the societies that were formed. For instance, the American Sunday School Union, American Education Society, and American Bible Society, but then also the revivals came on the scene. And so as evangelists spread the gospel in the late 1700s, then the church then grew as the frontier westward continued to expand, and those preachers began to bring others to Christ through their preaching. The Western preacher was talked about quite a bit, pretty rough around the edges, and wasn't necessarily flashy, but it said that this preacher is of a highly popular cast, and its first aim is to excite the feelings. Said that this country opens a boundless theater for strong, earnest, unlettered eloquence. So that was effective. That preacher, type of preacher, certainly was used to bring people to Christ. And so he started to highlight the Presbyterian preacher, who apparently was very influential or inflammatory. Even James McGrady says that he would preach stressing the wrath of the Lord against stiff-necked sinners, and he was one of those that had a huge impact and developed what really changed the course of evangelism in America by establishing these gospel camp meetings. And the camp meetings really are continued for really the next couple hundred years. That's still a thing in different forms, whether outside or indoor camp meetings like the Billy Graham Crusades, and I think now even the Passion conferences and things like that, women's conferences that we hear about that have been a part of in men's movements like the Promise Keepers in the 90s that many took part in. And so that's still happening today. But then slavery came on the scene, and that's where he spent the rest of the time, and how slavery became 2 million slaves in America, and how the church had to deal with that issue. And then Civil War, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and all of the influence there of the movement of the black church as slavery was abolished. Then the chapter concludes then with cultural shocks afterwards that continue to be influential today: evolution, industrialism, and then just the scholastic scrutiny of the Bible. So many issues to deal with. When it comes down to it, though, we must be the church, the body of Christ, in the nation in which we live, whether it's the United States or another country around the globe. And so that was something that encouraged me to think through as I read this chapter. Have a great weekend. Thanks, guys.